Good evening. It's so wonderful to welcome each and every one of you here to the new Learning Lab here at the Computer History Museum. My name is Marguerite Gong Hancock, and I'm the Executive Director of the Exponential Center here, which is your host for tonight. So tonight we have in store for you a double hitter evening all about alpha girls. And look at these amazing women that we have featured for tonight. Please join me in giving them a warm welcome. So for this portion of our evening, we're going to be talking about alpha girls and one word of advice or one attribute that's been significant to them in their careers. What's the story about one word? Well, here at the Computer History Museum, Exponential Center started in saying what would be a way to have an array of stories from amazing people around Silicon Valley. And so we've been asking people, what is your one word? And how many of you noticed the 30-foot wall when you walked in? This is an exhibit that's featured in the lobby right now. And we have not only the exhibit, but also a book that goes along with it, where we have a lot of people who have shared their one word of advice, as well as a little bit about them. So tonight is a rare opportunity to hear from three extraordinary women, all part of Broadway Angels. These are women who've been trailblazers in investing and in building remarkable companies here. So since this is a chance to be informal, I thought we'd start with just asking each of them to give a short introduction of you and a little bit about your journey. Laurie, can we start with you?
Hi. Wonderful to see you all here tonight. So my background is I was a computer scientist by training and started out working as an executive in large companies, then switched to some smaller companies and began investing on my own and through other organizations throughout my career. So have done a little bit of the executive role in technology, the startup role, and investing, and now I serve on public and private boards.
One board that I would just want to highlight is that Laurie is one of our own. She's one of the trustees here at the Computer History Museum, so we appreciate that. Thank you. Joanna.
Hi, I'm Joanna Drake, and I came out here in a VW Cabriolet Bug with my mom sitting right there in 1988. I had thought I wanted to go to school in New York, but she convinced me that the best spot in the world was the Bay Area. She later moved here. So we came out, I went to Berkeley, Stanford, and then after a short stint in management consulting with Booz Allen and Hamilton, began a series of media tech startups. The most well-known you might have heard of, a company I was COO and head of strategy and international for about 10 years, called Current TV, which we launched with Joel Hyatt and Al Gore. And that was social media before there was a category called social media. That was my funnest run. But fast forward, I later transitioned into venture, and I'm going to tell you the story about why with my one word today. So today I have a seed stage venture fund called Core Ventures Group, investing at the earliest, literally the first checks in of startups. And we're geographically agnostic and a very concentrated fund, and having a great time doing so.
Fantastic. Welcome, Joanna. Thank you. And Karen?
Hi, I'm Karen Boezi. I'm really pleased to be here. My mom started coding in 1960 in binary, and I've got to bring her here. So really pleased to finally see the museum. So my career, I started in banking, and I banked 3 companies for a firm called Warburg Pincus. And I went to work for Warburg Pincus in their seed stage life science group. And then I moved out to California to open the California office for Coral Ventures. And then several years later, my boss at Warburg Pincus and my boss at Coral Ventures, the 3 of us got together to start a firm. We raised $600 million for life science medtech investing. And that satisfied my entrepreneurial itch for a little while, but I kept seeing these companies come through that didn't have a CEO, and I was like, I can do that. So then I ran to run a company called Redwood Bioscience, and I realized it's way harder to be a CEO than it looks. But we were successful, and we sold that company about 5 years ago to a public company called Catalent. And now I'm a member of Broadway Angels and trying to give back, trying to start a STEM-focused school for high school girls in San Francisco.
So amazing women. So what we'd like to do now is ask each of them to share their word. What is the word Why did they choose it? Is there a story or something that goes along? So, Laurie,
Okay.
please reveal, what is your word?
So my word is inquire. And I thought about inquire because one of the things that has helped me throughout my career in every aspect was asking a lot of questions and learning how to ask the right questions. And so many things in my career were from sitting at a random place and talking to the person next to me and having them teach me something extraordinary, or becoming someone who became part of my network at random things like sitting on a plane or sitting in a cafe. And it helped me so many times throughout my career. And as an investor, it's very helpful because you tend to invest in a lot of different areas and you have to learn a lot of different areas very quickly. So being very interested and curious and inquiring to lots of people about a lot of topics has served me well. Later in my career, though, the thing that became much more important was learning to inquire within. It's easy to ask a lot of other people a lot of questions, but as I started serving on boards and started having more challenges in my career, I started thinking about, okay, how do I better understand that gut feeling? And when something doesn't feel right, or when something does feel right, how do I better understand what's actually going on? And so figuring out how to inquire within became very important. And now that I serve on boards, you know, you're not in an operational role, and so it becomes very important to figure out which questions to ask when, how to ask them, and very much understanding, certainly when there's a CEO and an executive team that may be under fire, how to ask those questions in a helpful way and in a strategic way has become really, really important, and something that I think is critical for every board member and investor.
Fantastic. I know one question I want to ask you is, what questions do you like to ask? But we'll come back to you. Thank you.
Before I reveal my one word, I must say that I never take a meeting with Laurie without doing my homework first, because, man, she's a tough cookie. So I think that's a perfect word choice. My one word is raise, as in raise venture capital, in this case, and ultimately raise women up. And the reason I chose this word is because as I think back on my career, after spending about 15, 16 years building tech startups from scratch, I never had the responsibility of fundraising because I had very prominent, visible, aggressive male CEOs who were doing all the fundraising. So I hadn't thought quite that much about that piece of the equation and was more focused on heads down company building for that bulk of my career. So it wasn't until at Sonia's invitation I joined Broadway Angels as I think the first operator angel that I stood up and for the first time recognized just how few women were in venture. If I had done my homework and noticed, I would know that, as depending upon your source, less than 10% of the decision makers in venture are women. So basically, those individuals who pick the entrepreneurs that are going to get the funding to build the products in the markets that ultimately will impact all of our lives, most of them, the great majority, less than 10%, are women. And as I was experiencing being an angel investor, it was actually quite painful to watch many of extremely capable female founders struggle to raise capital on Sand Hill Road. And it made me, even without a policy, choose to back mostly female founders in my angel investments. But after a couple of years, I actually felt a bigger responsibility because the numbers weren't changing. And if you look at the number of founders that are backed by venture, depending upon the source again, it's less than 2 or 3% are female founders. So we really have a problem here. And I felt a responsibility to transition into venture, even though it was never a career that I had planned for. So I joined my now partner, and we have our seed stage fund, as I mentioned. But the first thing we faced was the challenge of fundraising without a financial track record. So learned the hard way just how non-transparent and complex the world of LPs are. You know, of course, they're high net worth individuals and family fund offices, but they're also endowments and sovereign funds, and everyone wants to play with venture capital in Silicon Valley. So the truth of the matter is you could spend years taking meetings and never raise a fund. So I did something at the time that was courageous. I co-founded a conference in what has now become a community 4 years in called Raise. And the whole point of it is to recognize and celebrate the fact that there is increasing diversity in the emerging fund manager space, and their returns are fantastic. So once a year, we bring together LPs who are interested in supporting new emerging fund managers and those fund managers and help them be successful. Similarly, I'm playing a leadership role on LP initiatives for the All Raise movement to increase females in the venture world and female founders that get funded. So raise has been a big theme, and if there's one piece of advice, particularly for women, that I want to support and advocate for, it's get good at raising capital, because only by building our own firms and populating the venture world with more women, I believe we'll have more female founders, more diverse companies that do good in the world, and ultimately will change the face of venture and tech.
Fantastic. Thank you, Joanna. Great. Karen, please.
So I love the word raise. When I was out fundraising for our very first fund, I found it to be a huge advantage to be a woman, and my colleagues would actually bring me along to these state pension funds because they say, see, we can check the diversity box. So it was a huge advantage for me personally. But my word is believe. And so one of the things that I think that I did best in my career was to pick the people who I worked for. And they believed in me before I believed in myself, and they enabled me to ultimately believe in myself. So I actually, at my second job, asked my potential boss for references because I wanted to see if he referenced well, especially with women who had worked for him. And he was a little surprised after I got the offer that I wanted to reference him. And it turned out that he had been a fabulous promoter of women. And so these men asked me to do some pretty crazy things when I was pretty young. They had me go out to University of Colorado at Boulder and said license some technology and start a company around it and hire the people. And I was terrified a lot of the time, but they believed in me. And then I had the opportunity to open a California office for Coral Ventures. And I didn't think I was ready for that either, but my, again, boss really believed in me. And then I was invited to be a managing partner with an equal vote to my former bosses at Thomas McNerney and Partners. And again, I didn't really feel I was ready for that, but they believed in me. And so I think it's so important to find people who believe in you. And it's not, once you get the offer, it's okay to go ahead and ask them for references and make sure that they're quality people who are going to be promoting you. And then I came to believe in myself, and I've always believed that everybody deserves a seat at the table. I think there are a lot of women in particular who feel like, oh, I'm not qualified enough. I haven't achieved this, I haven't checked all the boxes. But I think in part because I went to an all-girls school, I always believed that I deserved a seat at the table. And I think that made a big difference. And so now I'm trying to kind of give back and to create this all-girls school in San Francisco to teach a next generation of girls that they need to believe in themselves.
Thank you. So you've heard 3 amazing words here. Thank you. Believe, right? Raise and inquire. Let's open a conversation. This is the opportunity that we have to have a smaller group right here and to get you in the conversation by raising some questions to these people. Who would like to go first? Please. How are you?
Mostly male investors is that women's help gets vastly ignored. Women as consumers are accepted in other consumer areas, but women are not prioritized in medicine, at the research and venture funding. And I've been struggling with this for a very long time. I know we've talked about it. Do you have any insights for me? And for the community on how healthcare is such an important thing, and we are 50% of the people of 51, how do we get around this?
And that's a very
It's a great question. I think I'm seeing more product innovation for women. I recently looked at a maternal fetal heart rate monitor. Right. So, well, and I'd love your opinion on this too, because you're. But the thing that's probably concerning me the most is where AI is going. And so I recently looked at this issue on AI and drug development, and drug development is only as good as the data that's used in AI, right? And so much of the data is from white men. And so my concern is that we are going to continue developing drugs for white men, and the metabolism of a woman is very different. Our cardiac function's very different, right? Our hormones are very different. And so I don't think you can use that one-size-fits-all mentality. And so I'm probably, with the advent of AI, maybe more concerned about the issue rather than less. Anne, what do you think?
Let's get Anne into the conversation.
Yeah, my name is Andy Gees. I have a group called Health Tech Capital. So Anula, I have never seen a tidal wave of femtech that in the last 3 years. There's over 400 companies that have been started. The big risk is that they get the capital for the seed. The capital is there. There's a couple of small funds dedicated to women in femtech. The problem that I see is the venture industry has to come behind it for the Series A and the Series B. And my experience is that it's really hard to raise those capitals because the bar that they're asking is, in my view, higher in the revenues, the cost of acquisition, the business models in that space. So I think it's the biggest revolution I've ever seen in my 35 years in investing in the space. Some of them will make it, and unfortunately some won't. Some are started by women. There was a Femtech event in San Francisco 3 weeks ago, maybe 2 months ago, and 98% of the audience were women. And I spoke up and I says, you know, unless we have male VC in the room, we have a problem. So the good news is great deals out there, but it's going to be really tough for the A and the B round.
And if I'll add on the AI question, I've spent a lot of time in AI, and there is an organization that was founded that I'm part of called AI for All, which is trying to get many more diverse voices into AI for that exact reason, because if you're only gathering data on one patient population and it doesn't include women or other diverse populations, you're not going to have the research that's done in that area. So it's very important to raise up your voice and make sure that the data that's going in represents a much wider population for healthcare in general.
Thank you, Laurie. Next question over here.
On that. As a woman, I have both benefited and seen the horrific consequences of this new wave of feminism, or whatever you want to call it. I went from having a boss go, shh, the men are talking to me 2 years ago, to being the CEO of my own company where I tell people what to do. But how do we, men or women, how do we just start working together and not be labels on each other?
Great question. So for those who are, she said that in the last few years she's gone from her boss saying, shh, the men are talking, to now being CEO of her own company. How do men and women work together for moving forward?
I was just going to comment that I feel privileged to have worked so closely with co-founders and partners that are male that do all the hard work of respecting me very proactively in front of other males and other audiences. So my partner Shunya now always starts first asks my opinion if I haven't started off with it, but then always uses the pronoun she for any sentence, and the list goes on and on and on. But I think there are some very special advocates for women that don't just have to be the women, and that's a really good place to start. So I think it's all about who we choose to partner with, and I'd say the same thing about my husband too. So.
Laurie or Karen, would you like to add anything about male, female
Well,
dynamics?
I think diversity is incredibly important. I think we need both points of view at the table. It's been shown if you have at least 30% women in a senior management team, you can increase your bottom line by 600 basis points. So, but that's 70% men, right? So I think that it's really important that we get to better representation of women in a diverse community.
And I'll just share one specific, sorry to add on, but one specific stat that we are seeing now in the emerging fund space. If an emerging firm has at least one female partner or a partner that represents a diverse minority, they will raise larger funds faster than all male counterparts or all female counterparts, and we have early data indicators that they are outperforming their all male or all female counterparts. So to the point of getting everyone around the table, that data is now showing up in the emerging fund space.
How would you handle, or how do you handle if gender bias behavior is directed?
Question is, how do you handle when gender bias behavior is directed towards you? Who'd like to start?
I hope it never happens.
I think everybody's had experience. Laurie, do you want to start?
I'll start. You know, often with humor, because I think if you come across as harsh, you're just not invited back into the room. So now more and more, I'll call it out. But I have to say, with efforts such as Alpha Girls and other discussions that are happening right now, more often than not, the men in the room call it out, and I don't have to say anything. If there are other men around, in fact, I will tell you, I was sitting through an investment pitch today with a group of men, and the slide came up with the CEO, and one of the men in the room said, "Oh no, we're not even thinking about that. He's a sexual predator." And this is not someone that is all over the headlines. I didn't say a word. I just listened to this, and he said, "Oh no, in his last company, there were some women who came forward that were upset." And so I'm finding now, be in the room, have a sense of humor, but be willing to talk about things if they don't notice. But I think more and more, hopefully you can be with men who are, and all men and women who are noticing this. But I have always found humor works really well, but also speaking up and being a clear communicator and calling it out, but hopefully not in a harsh way.
I think, ultimately we all have biases, so the first important processing point is to recognize that. And so for me, I think having not only humor but empathy, and I'll give you one example of my own embarrassing bias. It was about 6 months ago, one of our tech startups had hired 2 great engineers out of school at roughly the same time. And one was pretty aggressive in negotiating their comp, happened to be the male, and one was not, happened to be the female. And it wasn't until a board meeting where we were reviewing equity grants and such, it was actually my partner that challenged and said, what are the qualifications that allowed him to have a higher comp? And it came out from the female CEO who was negotiating the deal that he was more aggressive. And so we all have to actually ask those questions, and I think having empathy around knowing that we have our own biases, that being a perfect example, is a good place to start.
That's a great point, and I have to say in a lot of meetings now, we'll look at anything and I'll say, I use the word bias all the time now, and I'll say, well, my bias is this because I've seen this technology before. So in any industry, I'll just say, well, based on my experience, I'm going to be biased on this one, just to continue to point out we all have biases and based on our experiences about people, about things, about topics.
Next question, let's go to the front here. Keith?
Laurie, you mentioned that your experience going to a women's school influenced the way you work in the business world. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, when you're at an all-girls school, so I went 9 through 12, the person who was running our school, the head, was a woman. And we had filled every role. We filled every leadership role, right? We were president of the student council, was a girl, right? We answered every question. There was no opportunity to have bias against us in STEM subjects. And so it's actually been shown girls who go to all-girl high schools are 6 times more likely to go on to pursue a degree in STEM in college, and they're 80% more likely to hold a leadership position. And I think it's because you don't have the bias that does start to creep in high school, as has been proven in research. And so I think that's where the confidence is built, is that you can participate in a man's world.
Did you also go to an all-women's college?
I did not, but so I went to the Wharton School undergrad, and I had a finance professor, say, ask us a question. He said, which of you women went to an all-girl high school? And we raised our hands, and it turned out that the women who were confident to speak up during class were the women who had raised their hands and attended an all-girl school.
Next question. Who else would like to tee up something for our panelists? Anne?
I found that the most effective way to change is not to have women try to force the change, but really enable the men to be recognized when they themselves basically call it like Laurie was doing. And one of the things I do is pay it backwards, which is the people who enabled me in the past to thank them because they can influence 100 people where I can only influence only people. So what are the ways we can, basically get to reward the men who are basically fighting for us?
I think that's such a great point because I was going to say, for me, in my career, I've worked in quite a number of companies, and I would say I have equal number of male and female mentors and, more importantly, sponsors in my career. So to me, it was always finding someone extraordinary to work for. And I probably would pause more and spend more time trying to also get to know fabulous women that I heard about, many in the audience, and spend more time getting to know them. But I've had so many tremendous male mentors and sponsors as well. And so I've kept up those relationships and tried to go back to thank my mentors and sponsors that are male and female and tell them what they did that was incredibly profound, and also share the stories with other men about men and women who've gone out of their way to really help me in my career. And I think the men and the women want to help, but some people don't really understand how to be an effective mentor and sponsor. And so I think giving them really concrete examples of what worked and helped in your own career is really important. I had a gentleman very early in my career that just called me to his office. I was at Visa, and he was head of engineering at the time, and he called me to his office, and I thought I'd done something wrong. And instead he said, hey, I want to start looking at new technologies with you. Would that be interesting for you? And he just plucked me out to start doing that. And it was just wonderful. And he's been a friend throughout my career. So I think there's some wonderful people, and we just need to make sure to applaud and talk about them.
On a bright note, within the Broadway Angels group, one of the trends that we're experiencing, which suggests a generational shift, is that we are having a fair amount of male founders who don't yet have female co-founders or female investors or females on the board, and they're coming to Broadway Angels specifically in order to get us involved. So I think when they're doing that, we embrace that and help and support. But it's been coming at a great pace, so things seem to be shifting generationally.
And when they walk in the room, they always take a step back and say, wow, I have never been in a room with all women investors
I've never
before.
been so terrified in my life.
I know.
I think it's a great question, and what I've tried to do is shine a light on the men who have been really supportive of women. I think Julian's book touches on some men who have been great sponsors of many women in the room, and I think it's important to do that, because we want to encourage every man to do that, right?
We have time for one last question. I'm going to call on Tina.
Yeah, Margaret, great space, wonderful space, and congratulations on everybody's success. And we talk a lot about men versus women. Recently, I was educated on this issue. What about women and women of color? And one person can be like, hey, would you ever see women? It's really the white women that is getting fit, and people of color are not. How do we change that? How do we help drive that conversation forward?
Question was, in the diversity movement, it's not just women, but there's women of color, and how do we expand who's being involved in the conversation?
So it's a really important question and point. The numbers are far worse for certain minority groups, for sure, in venture, and then as venture-backed founders. One of the things that we are doing at our RAISE conference every year is there's such high demand to get one of the 150 invites as a GP or to be included as one of the 150 LPs present. But in regards to the GP invites, we prioritize. I gave all of my invites to females this year, but I also gave extra credit scores when we're ranking to try to get minority females or minorities represented in any form. So I think you can kind of push it a little bit when you're in charge of organizing forums. And one thing that I have been doing for years now is if I get invited to a conference or to speak on a panel and I don't see another woman or a representation from a diverse community that's not represented, depending upon the setting, then I actually tell the organizer, I don't want to come unless you let me invite someone. If you can't find him, I'll find him for you. So I think we can all be our own kind of advocates and agents.
I do the same thing, and it's very easy. And usually they say, well, I don't know anyone. Will you introduce me? And I say, I'll send you a long list, you know. Yeah.
Same for board positions, I think.
In my school initiative in September, we're launching an intro to STEM careers where primarily women of color will be talking about their career and demoing a product. And that's launching initially to 9 all-girls schools in public schools in Texas. And 88% of those girls are minorities, and these are STEM-focused schools. And so I do think it is a very important issue and something that I would love to try to make a little impact on.
You know, our time has come to a close. The great news is we're going to have time for networking and informal interactions. This is part of what is the mission of the Computer History Museum, to convene conversations with extraordinary people, both on the panel and in the audience, about issues that are important to us now, things that have driven the past, innovation, entrepreneurship, and things that will be important going forward. So on behalf of the museum, please join me in thanking Laurie, Joanna, and Karen for their words tonight.